You've probably been told at some point that the damage is already done. That decades of fast food, antibiotics, and stress have left permanent marks inside your gut. Marks that no amount of kale or turmeric can undo. That belief is wrong. The science behind why it's wrong is more remarkable than most people realize. Right now, in this exact moment, the lining of your intestine is in the process of rebuilding itself. Not metaphorically, literally. Cell by cell, in a cycle that never stops, whether you're 25 or 75. The real question was never whether your gut can heal. It can, on a schedule faster than almost any other tissue in your body. The real question is why. For most people over 50, it doesn't. By the end of this video, you'll understand what stands between you and a gut like the one you had decades ago, and what closes that gap. Here's what gut damage actually means. Almost nobody explains it clearly. It comes down to two things. The first is your intestinal lining losing its integrity. The tight seals between your gut cells start loosening. Things that should stay inside your gut begin slipping into your bloodstream instead. The second is your microbiome losing diversity. The wide variety of beneficial bacteria that used to live there shrinks down. What's left is a smaller, less resilient population. Fewer species means fewer bacteria producing the compounds your gut actually depends on. That loss of diversity has consequences that reach past digestion. A narrower microbiome produces less of the short-chain fatty acids your gut barrier needs. It also leaves more room for less helpful species to expand into the space the beneficial bacteria used to occupy. Think of it less like a population shrinking evenly. Think of it more like a garden losing its variety. Eventually, a handful of weeds start filling every gap the flowers used to hold. Not because the weeds got stronger, simply because nothing was left to compete with them. Doctors describe both of these as things that simply happen with age. A slow, one-way decline, like gray hair, like slower reflexes. Something you manage, not something you reverse. Patients hear this explanation constantly, from well-meaning sources. Often enough that it starts to feel like settled science rather than the oversimplification it actually is. That framing misses something fundamental about how your gut actually works. Every tissue in your body has a turnover rate. That's the pace at which old cells die off and get replaced by new ones. Skin turns over in about a month. Bone remodels over years. Your intestinal lining is nothing like either of those. It's the fastest self-renewing tissue in the entire human body. The complete lining of your small intestine and colon rebuilds itself from scratch every 3 to 5 days. Not repaired, rebuilt. Entirely new cells replacing the old ones, on a schedule that never stops. Read that again. It changes the entire conversation about what damage actually means. The physical tissue lining your gut gets fully replaced roughly once a week. That means the cells exposed to whatever damaged them years ago are already gone, long gone. What you're dealing with today isn't a scar from 1995. It's a fresh batch of tissue, built within the last few days. And it happens to be getting built under the exact same disruptive conditions that damaged the batch before it. This is the inversion most people never hear. Gut damage after 50 usually isn't old damage sitting there, unhealed, for decades. It's new damage, recreated on a loop roughly every week because whatever's driving it hasn't changed. That distinction matters enormously. It means you're not trying to repair something ancient and stubborn. You're trying to interrupt a cycle that's actively rebuilding itself in the wrong direction every few days. That's a fundamentally different problem than the one most people think they have, and it's a far more solvable one. The deeper question was never whether your gut has the capacity to heal. The research is unambiguous that it does, on a schedule most people would find hard to believe. The real question is different. What's been interrupting that natural rebuilding process consistently, long enough that it never quite catches up? That answer lives inside tiny structures called crypts, buried in the wall of your intestine. They're responsible for the rebuilding itself. Understanding how they work is going to change how you think about every meal from here forward. It also reframes something else worth sitting with for a moment. Your gut has been rebuilding itself on this schedule your entire adult life. That means every version of too late you've heard was measured against the wrong clock. About your diet, your habits, or your age, it doesn't matter which. The clock that actually governs your gut runs in days, not decades. That single correction is worth carrying into everything that follows in this video. It's the difference between watching this as ordinary health content and watching it as instructions your gut is waiting to receive tonight. Picture a construction crew that never stops working. Every few days, they rebuild the same wall, whether or not anyone tore it down the night before. That's close to what's happening inside your intestinal lining right now. Buried at the bottom of tiny pockets, called crypts, are small clusters of intestinal stem cells. Researchers count roughly 4 to 6 of these dedicated stem cells in every single crypt. They divide daily. They constantly produce new cells that migrate upward, mature, and eventually replace the entire surface of your gut lining. This isn't a slow background process. It's one of the most active regenerative systems anywhere in your body. Your digestive tract replaces about 100 billion cells every single day. To put that pace in perspective, no other organ system in your body rebuilds itself anywhere close to this fast. Your liver, famous for its own regenerative ability, takes months to meaningfully regenerate damaged tissue. Your gut lining does something comparable to that on a weekly basis, quietly, without anyone noticing, for your entire life. Here's where the metaphor becomes useful. A construction crew rebuilding the same wall every few days will keep producing the same flawed wall under 2 conditions. Either the blueprint they're using is flawed, or something keeps knocking bricks loose faster than the crew can set them. The crew isn't the problem. The conditions they're working under are. Your gut needs 2 things to build a strong wall: the right raw materials, and enough uninterrupted time between disruptions to actually finish the job. The materials come from a specific class of compound called short-chain fatty acids. The most important one for barrier strength is called butyrate. Certain bacteria in your gut produce butyrate. Species like Faecalibacterium, Prausnitzi, and Roseburia intestinalis. But they only produce it when they're fed fermentable fiber. Butyrate does something remarkable once it's made. It directly maintains the tight junction proteins. Those are the molecular seals between your intestinal cells. They determine whether your gut barrier holds or leaks. There's a second job butyrate does that rarely gets mentioned. The cells lining your colon don't run primarily on sugar, the way most of your body does. They run on butyrate itself. It's their preferred fuel source. So, when butyrate production drops, you're not just weakening the seals between cells, you're starving the very cells responsible for maintaining them. When your gut bacteria are underfed because your diet doesn't give them enough fermentable fiber, butyrate production drops. Tight junctions weaken. And the newly built lining, rebuilt just days ago, comes out of the process already compromised, before it's even had a chance to do its job. There's a specific protein worth knowing here too. It's called zonulin. It directly regulates how tightly those junctions stay sealed. Physiology researchers describe zonulin's control over intestinal permeability using a very specific word: reversible. Not fixed, not permanent. Reversible, in both directions, depending on the signals your gut receives day to day. That word choice isn't accidental. Researchers use precise language. Reversible carries real weight in a field that spent years treating gut barrier damage as something closer to fixed. It's a small linguistic detail, but it reflects a much bigger shift in how this field understands your body. A shift that's happened largely within the last decade. This is the mechanism behind the promise in this video's title. Your gut isn't fighting against decades of accumulated, irreversible scarring. It's responding in near real time to whatever raw materials and disruptions it's currently receiving. Change what you're feeding the construction crew, and the next wall, built within days, comes out different. The question that determines everything from here is simple. What's been feeding that crew the wrong materials for years without you ever realizing it? The answer, as it turns out, involves several specific mistakes almost everyone over 50 makes without knowing it. Small, ordinary habits, none dramatic alone, adding up to a construction crew working against itself every single day. Watch what most people over 50 actually do when they hear their gut might be damaged. You'll spot the mistake immediately. They treat it like a verdict, not a variable. Something that happened to them, finished, in the past tense. A diagnosis to manage, rather than a daily condition responding to daily inputs. This mindset alone becomes self-fulfilling. If you believe the wall can't be rebuilt differently, you never change what the crew is working with. The second mistake sits right next to the first. Expecting a fix to work instantly, then abandoning it when it doesn't. Someone eats more vegetables for 4 days. They don't feel dramatically different. They conclude it isn't working. But the rebuilding cycle runs every 3 to 5 days, not every 4 hours. A handful of better meals barely completes one full renewal cycle. Real shifts in barrier strength and microbial diversity are the kind researchers can actually measure. They tend to show up over weeks of consistency, not days. Quitting on day 4 means never finding out what day 30 would have shown you. The third mistake is more structural. It's also harder to notice. Continuing to eat in ways that actively damage the tight junctions faster than the daily rebuilding process can compensate. A high-fat diet is one of the clearest examples researchers have identified. Studies feeding mice a high-fat diet for extended periods found measurable disruption to the proteins holding intestinal cells together. Alongside that came increased gut permeability and inflammation reaching the liver through the bloodstream. This isn't a once-a-decade insult. Every meal built around this pattern is a fresh disruption. It lands on a lining that's only days old, one that hasn't had time to fully mature and strengthen before the next hit arrives. The fourth mistake is chasing isolated detox interventions instead of sustained dietary patterns. A single green juice, a 3-day cleanse, a supplement taken sporadically, then forgotten. All of these treat gut health like a one-time event, rather than the ongoing cell-by-cell process it actually is. Your crypts don't care about one good day. They respond to the pattern of materials they're consistently given, meal after meal, week after week. The fifth mistake is perhaps the most understandable. Not realizing that stress and poor sleep count as disruptions too. Chronic stress hormones alter gut permeability through pathways that have nothing to do with diet. This means someone can eat reasonably well and still undermine their own barrier repair, all through an unmanaged stress load running quietly in the background, night after night. There's a sixth mistake worth naming, because it's the quietest of all. Assuming that because a food is labeled healthy, it automatically feeds the right bacteria. Refined foods marketed as health products are often low in actual fiber. They frequently do far less for your gut barrier than a plain baked potato with the skin still on. Protein bars, veggie chips made mostly from potato starch, and fruit juices stripped of their fiber are common examples. All of these can look like gut-friendly choices sitting on a shelf label. In reality, they offer the crips almost nothing to work with. The label tells you very little about what your crips are actually receiving. There's a seventh pattern worth mentioning. It's less a mistake than a missing piece. Not accounting for medications that quietly disrupt the gut lining. Long-term use of certain common over-the-counter pain relievers is well documented to increase intestinal permeability on its own. This happens independently of diet entirely. Someone can be doing everything right at the dinner table. They can still undermine their own repair through a habit that has nothing to do with food. None of these mistakes are moral failures. They're simply what happens when nobody explains that your gut runs on a rebuilding cycle measured in days. One that requires consistent inputs, not a single dramatic gesture. Once that clicks, the actual solution becomes much less mysterious than it first appears. 7 mistakes, repeated week after week, are considerably easier to interrupt than one giant, permanent problem ever could be. Here's what the research actually supports. Translated into things you can put on a plate this week. The first priority is fermentable fiber, specifically the kind that feeds butyrate-producing bacteria directly. Beta-glucan, found concentrated in oats, has real data behind it in exactly your age group. A study involving 18 older adults with digestive symptoms found that beta-glucan from oats significantly reduced intestinal hyperpermeability. It essentially tightened a barrier that had been running loose. A bowl of oats most mornings isn't a trend. It's a direct, evidence-backed input for the exact repair mechanism described earlier in this video. The second priority is polyphenol-rich fruit. The evidence here comes from a population about as close to this channel's audience as research gets. A 10-week dietary intervention gave healthy elderly adults regular servings of strawberries. It produced a measurable shift in gut bacterial composition. Beneficial genera increased, the kind linked to reduced inflammation and better metabolic function. 10 weeks is roughly 70 days. At a renewal cycle of 3 to 5 days, that's somewhere around 17 full rebuilding cycles for your gut lining, each one built with slightly better raw materials than the one before it. The third priority is adequate, well-distributed protein. This is where the evidence gets genuinely remarkable. A 12-week randomized controlled trial included 84 older adults, many living in long-term care facilities. They received 3 daily meals containing modest amounts of soy protein. By week 12, the intervention group had preserved their calf circumference. That's a real measurable marker of muscle mass. The control group's calf circumference measurably shrank over the same period. The mechanism traced directly back to the gut. The protein shifted the microbiome toward more short-chain fatty acid-producing bacteria, and away from species linked to poorer muscle outcomes. The fourth priority is variety over volume. Diversity of plant foods feeds a wider range of bacterial species, not simply more fiber from one single source. A wider range of species is what rebuilds a more resilient, diverse microbiome. Eating the same 3 vegetables on repeat narrows the population of bacteria your gut can support, even if they're excellent vegetables. Aim for range across a week, not perfection in any single meal. The 5th priority is simply time, protected from constant disruption. The lining rebuilds every 3 to 5 days. Give your gut even 1 to 2 weeks of consistently better inputs. That's enough time for several full renewal cycles to complete under improved conditions. This only works without the high-fat, low-fiber pattern that keeps re-injuring the lining in the meantime. This is where most of the meaningful change actually happens. Not in a single meal. In the accumulated effect of cycle after cycle, each one building slightly stronger tissue than the last. There's a practical way to think about pacing this. Treat the first week as simply removing the worst disruptions. The fast food, the sporadic eating, the liquid-heavy meals that dilute everything. Treat the 2nd and 3rd weeks as steadily adding the specific inputs described above. By week 4, you're not hoping for change. You're several renewal cycles into a measurably different pattern, and the research suggests your gut lining already reflects that. Put simply, oats most mornings. Fruit with real color and polyphenols. A consistent protein source through the day. Variety across your week. And enough patience to let 2 or 3 renewal cycles actually complete. None of this requires extremes. It requires consistency, long enough for your gut's own remarkably fast rebuilding process to catch up, and finally, get ahead. Most people quit right before that catch-up point arrives, simply because nobody told them how close it actually was. Knowing the timeline in advance changes what giving up too soon actually looks like. Roughly 2 to 3 weeks for the first measurable shift is a realistic expectation, not an instant one. That's a very different number than the 4 days most people give it before concluding nothing is happening. Here's the detail from that soy protein study that deserves to land harder than it usually does. The people in that trial weren't healthy, active 50-year-olds looking to optimize an already strong baseline. Many were living in long-term care facilities. That's the population conventional wisdom treats as furthest past the point of meaningful physical improvement. If gut and muscle decline were truly a one-way, irreversible road, this group should show it most. This is where that road should have been the most traveled, the damage most locked in, the case closed. 12 weeks later, the group given modest daily soy protein had preserved muscle mass that the control group lost. Not through medication, not through intensive physical therapy, through a dietary change that shifted their gut microbiome toward bacteria associated with better outcomes, and away from bacteria associated with worse ones. If measurable reversal is achievable in one of the most physiologically vulnerable populations researchers study, a different idea deserves reconsidering. The idea that your own gut, wherever you're starting from today, has already crossed some permanent point of no return. The evidence doesn't support that idea. Not even close. This is the inversion sitting at the center of this entire video. The story most people absorb about aging and gut health is a story about accumulation. Damage stacking on damage, year after year, until eventually it's simply who you are now. A fixed identity, not a changeable state. But your gut doesn't actually accumulate damage the way that story implies. It rebuilds itself completely every few days. Each rebuild reflects the conditions of that specific week. Not a running tally stretching back to your 20s. What accumulates isn't the damage itself, it's the pattern. The repeated set of instructions your gut keeps receiving meal after meal. That pattern determines something specific. Whether each new rebuild comes out a little stronger or a little weaker than the last. This is a genuinely different model of aging than the one most people carry around. The common version treats your body like a car accumulating mileage, wearing down a little more with every year, with no real way to reverse the odometer. The gut doesn't run on that model. It runs closer to a garden that gets replanted every few days. What grows depends far more on this week's seeds and soil than on every season that came before it. Change the pattern, and you're not fighting years of history. You're simply giving the next rebuild, arriving within days, different instructions to work from. This is also why the timelines in real research keep landing in weeks, not years. 10 weeks for measurable shifts in beneficial bacteria. 12 weeks for measurable preservation of muscle tied to gut changes. 18 participants showing reduced permeability from something as simple as daily oats. None of these studies ran for a decade. The underlying biology doesn't require a decade. It requires enough consistent cycles, and your gut completes one every 3 to 5 days, whether you're paying attention or not. The uncomfortable part of this information is that it removes a comfortable excuse. Too much damage, too many years, was never entirely true. The encouraging part is what replaces it. A body that's already doing the rebuilding work automatically. One that has been the entire time, simply waiting for better materials to work with. That waiting has nothing to do with punishment or penance. It's just biology, patient and indifferent to how long the wrong instructions were given. It's ready to respond the moment better ones arrive on the very next cycle without needing an apology first. Think about what that reframes for you personally. Every excuse built on the idea that too much time has passed loses its footing. Not because willpower suddenly matters more. The biology never actually supported that excuse in the first place. The honest version of this story was always more hopeful than the one most people were handed. It just never got explained clearly enough to stick, buried instead under decades of manage it, don't expect it to change. There's a reason this channel keeps coming back to the same handful of biological mechanisms, instead of chasing whatever happens to be trending this month. Your gut's rebuilding cycle isn't an isolated curiosity. It connects to nearly everything else covered here. The stomach acid decline behind chronic bloating, the liver's dependence on a healthy gut barrier, the muscle preservation shown in that 12-week soy protein trial. All of it traces back to the same handful of mechanisms running in the same organ every single day. Think about how differently that reframes something like a stubborn 10 pounds brain fog by mid-afternoon or aching joints. None of these get resolved by a single mechanism covered in one video. But they often share more of their root system than most people realize. That shared root system runs directly through the same crypts described earlier in this video. Once you understand that your intestinal lining rebuilds on a multi-day cycle, a lot of old advice suddenly makes sense. That lining isn't frozen in whatever state it reached decades ago. It's actively responding to this week's choices right now. Whether or not you're paying attention, eat more fiber, get enough protein, manage stress. These stop being generic wellness slogans. They become specific instructions for cells that are, quite literally, about to be rebuilt again within days. Picture the shift in mindset this creates. Someone spent years assuming their digestion had simply worn out. Every meal felt like damage control, not opportunity. Then they learned that this week's food choices are direct instructions for next week's gut lining. That reframe alone changes behavior in a way that guilt or willpower rarely manage on their own. It's not about being perfect starting today. It's about understanding that the next renewal cycle is coming in a matter of days, whether you participate or not. You simply get to influence what it's built from. This is what separates real physiological understanding from the vague encouragement most health content settles for. Your body can heal is a nice sentiment. It doesn't tell you what to do tonight at dinner. Compare that to something more specific. Your intestinal lining fully rebuilds every 3 to 5 days. It uses butyrate from fiber-fed bacteria to seal the tight junctions that keep it strong. That's a mechanism, not a slogan. One you can actually act on immediately with food already in your kitchen. That's the entire premise behind every video on this channel. Not motivation, mechanism, not a slogan. A schedule your own cells are already running, whether or not you understood it until today. This is also why this channel resists quick fix framing, even when a quick fix would probably get more views. A 3-day cleanse promises transformation on a timeline that doesn't match how your gut actually works. The research described in this video ran for weeks, not days, because that's how long real, measurable change actually takes. Promising anything faster would mean promising something the biology doesn't support. That's not a promise this channel is willing to make, even when the honest version takes longer to explain. If this explanation gave you a piece of the picture nobody laid out this clearly before, stay connected here for the next piece too. Piece by piece, the parts of your biology blamed on just getting older have a more hopeful explanation waiting. That explanation only surfaces once the research gets a fair hearing, not a rushed one, squeezed into the last 2 minutes of a routine appointment mentioned in passing and forgotten by the parking lot. This channel was built on one idea. Most people over 50 have been underestimated by the health content aimed at them, talked down to with vague slogans, or alarmed with worst-case scenarios. Rarely handed the actual mechanism and rarely trusted to act on it. That's the gap this video, and every video before it, is trying to close. There's one more piece of this particular puzzle left. It brings this video back to the exact question it opened with. Go back to the belief this video started with. That decades of damage are simply locked in, permanent. Something to manage rather than change. You now know that isn't how your gut actually works. The tissue lining your intestine today is, at most, a few days old. It has already been rebuilt more times than you could easily count since whatever damaged it years ago. What's held you in place isn't old, stubborn scarring. It's a pattern. Repeating every few days, quietly recreating the same weaknesses because nothing about the instructions had changed. That's a fundamentally different problem than the one you probably thought you had. A pattern can be interrupted, starting with your very next meal. Old, permanent damage cannot. That distinction is the entire point of everything covered in this video. The research walked through here isn't speculative or distant or theoretical. 18 older adults saw measurably tighter gut barriers from daily oats. Elderly adults saw beneficial bacteria increase within 10 weeks of eating more strawberries. Long-term care residents, about as physiologically vulnerable as it gets, preserved real muscle mass in 12 weeks. Through a dietary change that worked entirely through their gut. These aren't outliers, cherry-picked to make a point. They're a consistent signal. The rebuilding capacity described at the start of this video is real. It's active. And it's responding right now to what you do next. Nothing about turning 50, 60, or 70 switch that process off. It's still running today, on schedule, the same way it has your entire life, whether you noticed or not. That's worth pausing on. Nobody sent you a notice when this system started working against you rather than for you. There was no clear before and after moment. No single meal you could point to and say, that's when it changed. It shifted gradually, the same way it can shift back. What changes the outcome isn't your age. It's simpler than that. It's whether the materials arriving at your gut, meal after meal, finally match what that process actually needs. Nothing more mysterious than that. There's something almost unfair about how simple this sounds, after decades of being told the opposite. But biology doesn't owe anyone a complicated answer just because the wrong answer got repeated for longer. Sometimes the truth really is this direct. Your body has been ready to rebuild the entire time. Nobody handed it the right materials to work with. Think about how many mornings you've woken up assuming today's breakfast barely mattered in the bigger picture. In one narrow sense, that was true. One breakfast rarely changes much on its own. But strung together, day after day, those ordinary mornings are the entire mechanism this video just spent 8 blocks explaining. There was never a separate, more important intervention waiting in the wings. The plate in front of you tonight is the intervention. If today's explanation gave you a clearer picture than just eat healthier ever did, follow this channel. New videos breaking down exactly this kind of research arrive every few days, on roughly the same rhythm your own gut is already running. Send this to someone who's decided their gut, or their body, is too far gone to bother changing now. There's a real chance nobody ever explained to them that the tissue in question gets rebuilt within the week. Every week. Without exception. Leave a comment with the part of aging you've been told is simply permanent. A symptom. A limitation. A decline you assumed was final. There's a good chance the research tells a different story. That's exactly the kind of question this channel exists to answer. One mechanism at a time. One video at a time. One renewal cycle at a time. The same way your gut has been operating since long before this conversation started. Your gut has been rebuilding itself this entire time, waiting for better instructions. Today, you found out how to give them. This video is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice. Always consult a healthcare professional.